Welcome to Eric Likes Animals podcast, the animal/environmental show that talks about current environmental related news stories happening around the world, along with a featured species every episode. I'm Eric Mahan. Thank you for joining me on this official, now us moving past my first full year into our second season. But enough about all that. Let's get started with some environmental news. Duckweed, the tiny leafed plant you see floating in ponds, may be the secret to greener, better biofuel of the future. Now, batteries and hydrogen may be a fantastic greener source, and it's great to power cars, but as for now, batteries are still having to be fairly large and still have to have a pretty small range compared to that of gasoline, so larger and further distance vehicles like planes, trains, and heavy machines, yeah, gas and diesel are still being used heavily. Also, the fact that resources to get cleaner vehicles to certain areas of the world will take a long time and can be very costly. So, it's not really the quickest solution right now, and kind of start trying to dial back our greenhouse emissions right away, not really the best. Luckily, however, in walks biofuels, a fuel that done correctly can be very green, as well as being used right away in many different diesel vehicles and machinery with very little or no modifications needed. And you may be thinking, yeah, we know about this. That's the vehicle that can run on French fry grease. But we've been talking about this forever, and I was promised delicious smelling French fry cars everywhere. Where are my French fry cars? Truth is, that method was not good for large scale use. Even as much as we Americans love our French fries, there was not enough for us to be able to drive all the cars that we needed. So, to produce something that's as effective as regular diesel and can be mass produced for large amounts of vehicles and not create a major environmental impact is not as easy as filling up your tank with fry grease, because if it would be, we'd be doing it by now. But luckily, people haven't given up on the dream of a good, clean, effective biodiesel. The U.S. Department of Energy's Brookhaven National Laboratory, along with its partners at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, are doing just that. They have taken a species of duckweed that had the potential to make biodiesel and cranked up that potential by 100. Literally, through genetic modification, they were able to increase the oil production of this species of duckweed 100-fold, which means the amount of duckweed you need to produce is far less. And before you get too worried because many people don't like the term of genetic modification, no, they don't cross the plant with an extremely oil fish like a sardine or give it teenage boy hormones to increase the oil production. So don't worry, we won't have a genetic modified monster creature, unlike in Jurassic Park. What the scientists did do, however, is just promote the genes that help produce oil in duckweed, which were already there, aka they just kind of genetically cranked up the dial on these genes. Now, the reason these scientists chose, out of all plants, duckweed is because, first off, duckweed grows rapidly. From anyone that ever had to clean a pond or have one, you probably know how quickly that pond can be taken over by duckweed, which really is kind of like the glitter of the plant world. It's tiny, there's always tons of it, and it seems to stick everywhere. Secondly, is duckweed does not need a lot of nutrients to survive. In fact, it seems to almost thrive in poor water areas like farm or other sort of runoff areas, which comes to the third and final big reason duckweed would be so great to use is because it also helps clean water from the human environment. It can reduce dangerous algae blooms in poor conditioned water, as well as help filter out and clean areas of runoff from roads and agriculture, making duckweed a double hitter when it comes to potential environmental benefits it can bring, with the possible solution not just to help clean the air, but the water as well. Next up, the naked mole rat, a name that honestly doesn't give how weird this amazing animal is justice. The naked mole rat has many out of the norm things. For example, these rodents live in colonies and have queens, and it is only the queen that is allowed to breed, which is something we see more in insects than, mammals. Another fascinating thing about naked mole rats is that they are one of the longest lived rodents, sometimes living up to 37 years. And even well into that old age, they actually can still reproduce, something many researchers wondered how. The reason they wondered that is for almost 70 years now, it has been taught and told to us that female mammals shortly after birth are endowed with a certain number of egg cells, and that number can never be added to, only reduced. However, as the researchers soon discovered with the naked mole rat, that's not so. When the naked mole rats are born, the females have no egg cells at all, unlike other mammals. They produce their egg cells, however, later on. They also produce way more egg cells than other mammals of similar size. But the big shocker was the fact that they can actually replenish those egg cells. They are not stuck with a certain number of egg cells from birth like other mammals. That is big news for us humans. No, not because we humans can now have piles and piles of kids and breed like mole rats. Yikes. If you think overpopulation was bad, it would be a whole much worse. Like, we're not trying to become naked mole rats here. The benefit that researchers hope to make with the naked mole rat is that they can try to find out how they are able to possibly make more egg cells. Perhaps a hormone or a treatment that can be found out to help out women, human women, that wants kids that currently can't. Really, whatever medical reason that a woman can have kids that want them may be solved, as well, of course, as many other possible health benefits for the human race. And it's all thanks to that weird, naked little creature running around underground in Africa. And then finally, a new frog has been discovered in the high Andes cloud forest of Ecuador. The new species of frog is in the stream frog group. The group of frogs live in clear mountain rivers and streams high up in the Andes Mountains. The tadpoles mature near rocks in the rapids of these high mountain streams, while the adults enjoy sitting in the lush vegetation around the riverbanks. What truly makes this new species so unique, however, is its colors. Described as otherworldly and something many other researchers said seems like it was a creature that hopped right out of the story pages of J.R.R. Tolkien's books like The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And of course, if you do Google this new frog discovered, you will see pictures of it yourself, which I do highly recommend checking out. But this frog is described, if you can't get to the Google machine right away, as a grayish green color with a yellow throat, belly, and flank that have black spots splashed across it. The frog's toes are also yellow with black spots as well, but the thing that really catches your eye is, well, their eyes. Their eyes are a dusky pink with dark black irises. So with colors like that, it's no wonder why the researchers described the frog like it came from one of Tolkien's stories. In fact, they thought so much that they actually named the frog in his honor. Because the scientific name of this frog, and excuse me, I'm terrible with pronouncing these, is Hylocytrus tolkienia, a fantasy-looking frog for a man that wrote fantasy. And that is your environmental news. So for today's feature species, we're going to be talking about an extremely unique species of fish that sort of looks like it was put together with pieces of multiple other species of fish and actually kind of a piece of a boat as well. It actually is a weird animal. As a kid fishing, I always secretly wished I would stumble upon. Just simply to catch a glimpse of this weird fish would have just made my day. Luckily, I've seen some at the aquarium by now, and they definitely lived up to their hype in my little kid mind. And I can't wait to tell you about these guys because the species I'm going to be talking about today is the American paddlefish. Now, there are only two whole species of paddlefish in the entire world, the American paddlefish and the Chinese paddlefish. Unfortunately, the Chinese paddlefish, which was actually much larger than the American paddlefish, is believed to be extinct. And if they do still survive somewhere, scientists feel it has most likely been hybridized by the American paddlefish that was introduced to those waters, so it's not really a true Chinese paddlefish anymore. The American paddlefish has been introduced actually all over the world in Russia and European waters to be fished for prized game fish, but more about that later. The American paddlefish are mainly freshwater fish, but can survive in brackish waters. They generally live in pretty large rivers and lakes that, for a minimum depth, about 6 meters or around 19 feet, are preferred. They also need access to sand or gravel bars during breeding season, so having access to many different parts of rivers and lakes and many other waterways is very important to them. The American paddlefish naturally can be found in 22 states, all of them connected to the Mississippi watershed. They did used to be found in 4 additional states, as well as in the Great Lakes and Canada. The American paddlefish can reach lengths of 7.2 to 8.2 feet, or about 2.2 to about 2.5 meters. They can weigh about 39.6 to 99 pounds, or about 18 to 45 kilograms, but they have been known to reach weights of 70 kilograms or even 154 pounds. Also, additionally, the males are normally considered larger than the females, and the American paddlefish can live up to 55 years. Just FYI, by the way, the Chinese paddlefish, which I said was much bigger than the American, was actually known to grow up to 23 feet or 7 meters long and weighed up to 992 pounds or 450 kilograms and was considered one of the largest freshwater fish in the world. Now, like I said at the beginning, the American paddlefish looks like a fish that was put together with other fish and a piece of a boat. But this strange look of the paddlefish is not just because it likes to be different. I mean, hey, I can dig it if that's all I wanted, but all of the special features of the paddlefish is it's important for its survival. And its survival skills probably is the reason the American paddlefish are actually a species older than the dinosaurs, with fossil records of paddlefish dating back all the way to 300 million years ago. This makes the American paddlefish one of the oldest surviving animal species in North America. So they gotta be doing something right. The two main fish a paddlefish actually looks like is a mix between a basking shark and a saw shark. But if you don't know what they are either, let me just describe then what the American paddlefish itself looks like. First up, when looking at it, you will notice that American paddlefish skin is pretty smooth. The American paddlefish are in fact not covered with smooth scales, but are almost completely naked of scales altogether, except for a few located on some fins. The skin itself is gray, and their body and fins do seem shaped very much like a shark, especially with a deep forked looking tail. Also, what helps them look like a shark is the majority of their bone structure is like a shark, with its body skeleton being made of cartilage, except for their jaw. But before I go any further explaining how much they look like sharks, it should be known paddlefish closest relatives are not actually sharks. They are in fact sturgeon. However, like a number of different sharks, they are also what is called ram ventilators, meaning for them to be able to breathe, they need to be in constant motion to be able to push the water through their gills. They have very tiny little eyes to them that many scientists say they don't seem to be used very well. And honestly, for an animal that lives in murky, hard to see water, having good eyesight probably not so important. In fact, you need to rely on other senses most of the time to help you navigate dark, murky waters. And one of the best things to use in those murky, dark waters is something called electroreceptors that can pick up the movement and the electricities that living animals give off. And luckily for the paddlefish, they're jam packed full of these special sensors. But just having them is not enough. It's also important for good placement for those electrosensors. And for the paddlefish, that means having them on their rostrum, sort of the nose spot on a fish. And the reason they want those sensors on their rostrum is because they use those sensors to find prey. So it's sort of a good idea to have that near your mouth so you can sense where you're going versus near your butt, which really wouldn't be very helpful at all when trying to find prey. But paddlefish are a bit of an overachiever when it comes to these receptors. So to make room for all these receptors on the paddlefish in the front near their mouth, yeah, that's kind of the main reason why they have this name. For paddlefish, they have a very big rostrum. It's long, it's flat, it's rounded, and it looks like a big paddle that's about 1/3 of its body has been jammed onto its face. Hey, looks weird, works great. They can use it like a metal detector, or in this case, a zooplankton detector, which is the main diet of the American paddlefish. Zooplankton are very small and hard to see, even in clear waters. They use this so-called food detector rostrum and move it back and forth through the water while having their mouth and gills wide open. And when I say wide open, I mean super wide open. So wide open, if a paddlefish were ever wanting to, it could probably fit 3/4 pounders stacked on top of each other and fit it all in their mouth in one bite. Now, this is the very same look basking sharks or whale sharks have, by the way, because the whole idea behind it is big wide mouth, sucks water through, and filters out the tiny prey. And filtering out prey is done by the American paddlefish with specialized gills, something called gill rakers, which sort of acts like a pasta strainer, but for much smaller things than yummy, delicious pasta. Paddlefish have another trick up their sleeve, or in this case, in their mouth, and that's to get the most out of their filter feeding. And that is their jawbone is actually free floating. So it's not really attached to the rest of the skull except through some muscles. That way it doesn't float away, allowing its mouth to get really, really big and allow in more water. This is something sturgeons also share with the paddlefish, but really not any other vertebrate animal has this so called floating jaw. Now, with all that water coming in, thanks to that floating jaw, it needs some help with all that water control, especially in its gill area. But luckily, in the gill chambers, the paddlefish has something called a spiracle. So the spiracle is actually an external respiratory opening found on their heads. The spiracles are also found on things like insects, normally all over their body in terms of insects, but also found on other fish besides the paddlefish, like, once again, sharks. Sharks use it just like the paddlefish in help exchange water to and from their gill area. Okay, enough about sharks. Let's head back to the giant, beautiful paddle on the paddlefish because really, it's just so cool. With that giant, sensitive paddle shaped rostrum, the paddlefish are actually able to pick up where its tiny little prey may be hanging out. In fact, that paddle is so sensitive. A juvenile paddlefish will be able to sense a single zooplankton from about 9 centimeters away, which doesn't seem very far, but for how small a zooplankton are, finding one in the middle of murky water, that's extremely impressive. The paddlefish are so sensitive, however, with that paddle to electric that they normally try to stay away from metal objects in the water. Doesn't like it, doesn't feel good, especially when they're so sensitive to electricity. Also, fun little fact about paddles, the other big difference between the Chinese and American paddlefish is actually their rostrum or paddle, because the American paddlefish does have what looks like a paddle. However, the Chinese paddlefish, it actually is more sword-like, so it's a little more pointed than that nice round paddle. And you would think with all the space on these paddles, that gives plenty of space for receptors. They would have all the receptors they need, but paddlefish are a little bit overachievers. They actually have these sensors around their mouth, eyes, and even a little bit going along their body as well. A majority of them by far is near their face for hunting, but it also pays to have a little bit around the rest of your body, especially in those dark, murky waters, to kind of just know where everybody's at. Now, you can even see the spots of clusters of these electrosensors across the body and even on the paddle. They are just the little grayish green spot clusters you'll notice that to anybody else just looks like spots on them, but that is actually their sensors themselves. However, when you start looking at the clusters, you will also notice a decent bit of these receptors, and even their eyes are kind of built to be more lateral on the fish or below the paddlefish. It kind of seems like it almost has a blind spot on top of its head because there's not a lot of receptors there and their eyes aren't really pointed in that direction. But luckily, the paddlefish has it covered because a paddlefish is a species that does have something called a third eye. And no, it's not Doctor Strange's third eye. This is a little bit different. So, with a third eye, it is normally a basic design of a so-called eye. And this eye is actually normally covered with skin. So, at first glance, it may be hard to even notice that it's there. This eye is not designed to create an actual picture like you or my eyes do, but there is still photoreceptors, but they are more for picking up different levels of light from the sun, which helps tell the paddlefish what time of year it is, sort of like a calendar tracker built in their heads. And that's important for them to make sure that they don't miss any important dates, and helps them do things like, well, figure out when it's time to breed. American paddlefish breed in late winter, early spring. However, it may not happen every spring for a female paddlefish because they are very particular about having the right conditions. The reason a female American paddlefish has to be so particular, however, is because they may be able to only spawn about 2 to 3 years. so they just can't throw it away so easily. By the way, when I say spawn, that's just a fancy fish word for breeding. Females, however, have to wait until they're about 10 to 12 years old until they can have their first fish spawning. Males, however, well, they're males, so yeah, they can start spawning at about 6 to 7 years old. Now, the two conditions that is most important for these females to be okay in releasing her eggs are first, being that the water levels must have a decent rise to them, which normally happens from good snowmelt and good spring rain amounts, all rising the waters in the springtime. Secondly, the water has to be warm enough. They like it when the water is around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit to breed in, which I know to many of you are not warm whatsoever. You're probably thinking, I'm not jumping in water that cold. But remember, these fish are living in these rivers and creeks and coming off of winter. Yeah, those waters of 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit is feeling pretty good for them this time of year. If all these conditions are right, the female and male paddlefish will migrate through the rivers, creeks, and lakes, going to historical breeding locations, which normally have nice sandy bars or gravel areas to spawn over. The paddlefish, by the way, are what are called broadcast spawners. That means the females will normally, all around the same time, near one another, start releasing roe, which is just a fancy term for eggs in the water. And those eggs in the water will go down onto the river or lake floors. Also, by the way, the eggs are normally very sticky, so they stay in place once they reach the river or lake floor. Then, normally, multiple males will start just swimming past, releasing milk, which is just a fancy word for sperm in the water, into the water near the eggs, hoping at least one egg around them will be fertilized by him. And if you're thinking this sounds chaotic, I mean, for the paddlefish, it's just life, but if you happen to watch it yourself, yes, it is extremely chaotic. Multiple eggs and sperm basically everywhere in the water, going every which way, with fish going every which way. It's crazy. But it does create a very diverse collection of genetics. For one female's egg cluster could have many different fathers, which sounds crazy from human standards, but no, that's fine. Really diversifying the genetics of the young paddlefish and hopefully raising the chances that one from that egg cluster will survive to adulthood so they can do the same one day. Because these parents sure aren't going to help out with any sort of rearing, because after fertilizing and laying those eggs, that's pretty much all the paddlefish mothers and fathers do for their kids. The fertilized eggs will hatch in a couple of days, and the yolk sac of the eggs will be the first thing the young paddlefish will eat when it hatches. Before it's off, however, to find zooplankton. Which is funny when you stop and think about it for paddlefish, for they are one of the few fish species that pretty much eat the same thing from when they're first born to adulthood. Even though when they are first born, they are extremely tiny. And when they are full grown, they can be a whopping 8 feet or about 2 meters long. But no matter what size they're going to be, they're always going to be going after these tiny little zooplankton. But finding zooplankton as a fresh hatch paddlefish, they are down the paddlefish's secret weapon. For when first born, paddlefish don't really have too much of a paddle yet or at all. Maybe because they're so small, it's easy for them just to see the zooplankton at that size. But then, interestingly enough, as they become juveniles, that rostrum or paddle starts to grow so rapidly it actually outgrows its body. But then finally, once it reaches adulthood, it sort of evens out a bit and the body catches up to the paddle back to the more reasonable 1/3 of its body length. Hey, and it makes you kind of feel better about yourself that even fish go through weird, awkward growing stuff and not just us when we go through puberty. But luckily for the paddlefish, that awkward stage doesn't last long, with them being mature in about 6 to 10 years, while us humans, I would like to say around 21, we're normally pretty good, but let's be real, our body never stops doing awkward things to us. Another thing besides not being awkward anymore for the paddlefish they have to look forward to is far less predators. For when the American paddlefish does reach its full size, there is not many, if any, predators it will have to worry about. It helps being one of the biggest North American freshwater fish sometimes. However, as it grows up, it has many other predators, from larger fish, reptiles like snakes and alligators, mammals like raccoons and otters, to birds like osprey and eagles. When you're a small fish, unfortunately, when you're face to face with an animal that likes to eat fish and you can fit in their mouth, you're pretty much lunch. For the conservation portion about the American paddlefish, the IUCN Red List lists the paddlefish as unfortunately vulnerable with population trend unknown because they are not doing great. And unfortunately, due to them being very hard to find and track in the wild, the population trend as right now of unknown makes a lot of sense. I mean, tracking them is hard because what sort of trap or bait can you use to get a fish that filters water? Not a normal way, that's what. And it normally ends up requiring using nets and all sorts of traps. But it can be done, and unfortunately, it can be done not just by scientists, but pretty easily by certain fishermen looking to score a big fish that has a lot of meat, that also has pretty much no scales to take off to cook. A real fisherman's delight for many. That's also a big reason why many other countries have tried to breed them and release them into their waters for game fishing. But here in the United States, in their natural range, that overfishing has hurt their numbers sometimes very drastically. But more so than the fish themselves, it doesn't help that the eggs of the paddlefish are prized after. They're related to the sturgeon after all, so paddlefish caviar is a major industry. Just like its cousin, the sturgeon, that has caused a great number of problems for both species. A number of other classic freshwater fish problems, of course, is farming and other sort of runoff from urban areas. Chemicals, also in your own backyard, normally end up polluting waterways, even if you're miles away from the nearest river. No matter where you live in the world, we all live in what is called a watershed. We all may live in different watersheds, but a watershed is basically a giant empty bathtub. It all angles down towards the drain. The drain, in the case, is the ocean. And when you put a chemical down in your backyard and it rains, those raindrops will pick up those chemicals and slowly but surely will start carrying that chemical closer and closer to the nearest water spot. Because water always goes downhill and eventually it will make it all the way to its first source of water, a spring, a stream, a creek, and will eventually get to a river and then the ocean, all the while polluting and causing damage to the environment on its way. Dams are another big problem. The restriction of the flow of water not only changes the environment and what animals can live there, but blocks migration of fish like the paddlefish. They need to migrate and they need to keep moving through different streams, creeks, rivers, and lakes to get food and to breed. And if a big dam blocks them from doing it, simply, they can't survive. The final big one I want to touch on, since it's kind of the last main stronghold of the paddlefish of the Mississippi River, a major threat for most things in the Mississippi River is that it's a major shipping lane, which means lots of boats, lots of traffic. Due to the major traffic of shipping lanes that is in the Mississippi River, you get a pollution from the gas and oil used to run the boats, along with increased loud noises from boat engines, a lot of metal everywhere, which we touched on paddlefish don't like, and also there's always a chance of a boat running into a paddlefish as it just simply swims along. So what can we do? Okay, I kind of went through a lot, sorry, but it's okay. We got this. For overfishing and taking their eggs, just stop. I mean, there are plenty of other fish in the sea, or in this case, the river, and there's probably plenty of ones that are less threatened. Just saying. But also, with good solid regulations and healthy, plentiful areas of paddlefish, along with good game warden supervision, fishing and harvesting really can still happen and have no major issues on the population. As for the chemicals and farming runoff, well, don't use so many chemicals for farming. There are a number of natural and or safer methods for farming now, along with for farm runoff issues from animal and whatever else kind of waste or spillage you may have on the farm. Creating filter habitats can reduce the amount of waste that ever makes it to the waterways. And if you're wondering what the heck is a filter habitats are basically the use of rocks and plants to create an almost natural filter that reduces the amount of stuff that ever makes it off of the farm. You can even purposely create natural wetlands in your backyard or on your farm where you know that water normally kind of heads whenever it rains or something. Because wetlands in nature are water filters for nature. So you can create a natural water filter system so that when the water does leave your area, it is actually much safer for the environment. As for the backyard, similar to farms in urban areas, just be mindful of what chemicals you are using, and especially if you're near waterways or general, create better gardens, natural gardens, pick natives, and also create natural buffers. Like, don't just have a lawn go straight up to a creek because there's all kinds of chemicals and problems with that. You want plants, you want trees, you want things that kind of create this filter or buffer zone between your backyard and the rest of nature. As for the dams, the European model of phasing them out for more environmentally friendly sources of energy and then removing them is a good step. Another is just doing proper fish highways. So many of these fish highways that are currently built on dams are small and actually become chokeholds because a variety of fish are trying to get through at once. And also, a lot of predators will actually purposely just wait out at the entrance of the little portal to take you up into the dam highway for the fish, and it creates kind of easy prey for the predator, and a lot of fish then can't get away like they normally do. So creating bigger versions of this, or just simply creating a large, more natural, almost kind of bypass river, can greatly reduce this from happening. That was most likely what originally was there before the dam was even put there. Then finally, the boat problem. Well, let's see. Noise, gas, oil, sort of a basic solution there. Electric or other alternative boats to gas. Wind can be used for ships. And for many, many years, designers and scientists have actually been looking back at the efficiency and the probability of using larger wind powered ships, just with a more modern swing on it, because they're even trying to plan out wind ships that would actually take over those large diesel powered shipping container ships that you see coming in and out of port all the time, because obviously that's a lot of pollution everywhere. Also, on a more smaller scale, electric boats, just like cars, are also coming along quickly and nicely. And just like gas versus electric cars, with no gas, there's no active pollution happening as the electric motor is running. Also, electric motors are much quieter than gas ones, so win 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 for the paddlefish. As for the metal, plastic and greener products are being invented and created for boats already, as well as them being stronger. They're actually more buoyant option than most metal boats. Except for the things that I just said that you yourself can do at home. Like if you're going to buy a boat, try and be more eco friendly with the type of boat you use, and don't pick bad chemicals for your backyard use. Things like that. Yeah, you can do that at home. You can do it right away. But let's not forget the rest will take time and money, some of which, like farmers, may not have or want to invest because they have, other things to worry about besides just fish. So remember, we want to push to make these changes, but these changes, if pushed too quickly, with no help from the people that are actually pushing to the people that we would be affecting, will just keep causing the problem we always face in conservation. It will become a standstill if one side wants to change to help the environment while the other side is worried about losing money to help take care of their family or whatever else they may need. Because we as environmentalists are asking for change and making people have to make these changes by themselves on their own dime with no help. Yeah, that's sort of a jerk move. And no, I'm not talking about the major corporations that have loads of money. I'm talking about the family farmer, the small individual these changes affect. But if we all come together and all help pitch in with helping create resources for the people we will end up affecting, these changes may go down a lot easier for these people than you may think. You may be surprised on how many more people are willing to change if given the proper chance. Because no one is a villain of their own story. And no one definitely ever wants to be the villain to cause the loss of such an amazing creature older than the dinosaurs, the amazing American paddlefish. And that's our show. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the American paddlefish. As always, make sure to check me out at my social media accounts like Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. If you ever want to reach me with a question or a comment directly, you can always email me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. Links and info will be provided in the episode footer below. I hope you enjoyed the start to year 2, season 2. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you all next time.